am joined by Mollie Hemingway, Fox News contributor, editor at The Federalist. Good morning, Mollie. How are you?
Great to be here with you.
You have appeared at exactly the right time because the AP just broke a story about Justice Sotomayor, who has made approximately $300,000 a year during her tenure as a Supreme Court justice selling books. Turns out that her court staff has worked over the people that she accepts gigs from. For example, at Clemson University in South Carolina, school officials offered to buy 60 copies before a 2017 appearance. Sotomayor's staff noted that most schools order around 400. Michigan State University asked Sotomayor to come to campus in 2018 and spent more than $100,000 on the copies of her memoir, My Beloved World. The books were shipped to the Supreme Court, where copies were taken to her chamber by court workers, signed by her before being sent to the school. It goes on and on and on. What do you think, Mollie? Is this going to get the same amount of attention as Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas?
It will not get the same amount of attention as the left's attacks on Republican-nominated justices, but it is interesting. I think a lot of people were wondering how she had made so much money on a book that wasn't, that interesting to a general audience. This helps explain that this type of work has been happening while she travels to campuses. But it's actually just somewhat surprising that the AP even noted that there was an issue like this with a Democrat-nominated justice.
Are you old enough to remember Speaker Wright?
Yeah, vaguely.
Okay. Speaker Wright wrote a book, and before he went anywhere, you had to buy 1,000 of them, and he made a lot of money, and he had to quit. Now, I have interviewed 3 justices about their book, Justice Breyer, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Thomas. And there were no conditions on that. And so they have all come to the Nixon Library when I was running it, and before I was running, there were no conditions put on it. People like to buy their books, but no one ever mandated it. That is a quid pro quo, Mollie. That's the real deal. Buy my book. If I'm coming, you've got to buy my book. Isn't that a quid pro quo?
Well, and these are taxpayer-paid staff that are doing this kind of marketing work for the book. It's not bad to try to sell a book, I guess, but to use court resources to do it and to put pressure on people in exchange for an appearance, I think, it could be a problem, and it could be something that the Supreme Court wants to revise their ethics rules to note.
Now, having said all this, she cannot be charged with any violation of an ethics rule because the court is it to itself. There's one rule. I've said all this stuff about Clarence Thomas is nonsense because the court exists independent and alone, and it can adopt rules of conduct, but they actually can't be enforced. The only way to remove a justice is to impeach them. But now we've got the Sotomayor precedent, Mollie. And do you think every story about Clarence Thomas will be preceded by a story about Sonia Sotomayor or a paragraph about her?
Not at all. And it's just a reminder that this entire coordinated news operation, information operation against the court is not really in good faith. We've had story after story. My favorite story, by the way, was the one where the New York Times accused Clarence Thomas of helping underprivileged children. The one that ran on Sunday, yes. I guess, where he was like,
the Horatio Alger Society, yes.
And it was written up as if it was somehow bad, and the whole time you're reading it, you're like, this actually sounds great that a man like Clarence Thomas would actually care about young, underprivileged people. But this whole coordinated effort is an attack on the legitimacy of the court because they are upset that the court is returning to a role of actually ruling on the Constitution and the laws of our land as opposed to legislating from the bench. That's all this is, and everyone should be very clear-eyed about that coordinated information operation.
Now, I am a big believer in the one standard rule, meaning the rule of law. Everybody's treated alike. We have got a coach at Northwestern being fired over a hazing incident about which he knew nothing, and the university confirmed that. And it's a new college president who came from the University of Oregon, so I assume he's thoroughly woke. And I got a note from a friend who went to Pennsylvania saying, I'd like to know what the University of Pennsylvania did to investigate the origins and funding of the Penn Center, Biden Center. The allegation surfaced of foreign funding, ambassadorships for the university president, chairman of the board of trustees, arguably as important as a football program, and misdeeds. I've seen nothing and have halted my paltry giving. Have you seen any investigation by the University of Pennsylvania into the Biden Center or the funding?
In fact, perhaps the opposite, and understandably so, because they were getting a lot of money funneled through their institution because of the Biden Institute's relationship to the university. High-level foreign funding running through their university doesn't look good for them, and it's an embarrassment, and it would probably make a lot of high-level people very uncomfortable, and so they haven't even pretended to investigate.
So Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern, have you followed that story at all? It stinks.
Just a little. This is about the football hazing.
Yeah. And he didn't know anything about it. They did a 6-month investigation. They gave him a 2-week suspension. And over the weekend, the new president, been there 10 months, changes his mind and fires one of the most beloved figures in the Northwestern community. What's your immediate reaction to the outlines of that story?
Without knowing the details on it, it just seems ridiculous. It just seems also like an overreaction to the initial story, too. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens with hazing, with young individuals, but it can be handled in much better ways. And also, like, overreaction to some of this stuff is really not healthy for young people. Also.
Underreaction and overreaction are the bane of the rule of law. My third example, my paired sets of things. First, we're combining Thomas and Sotomayor. Then we're comparing Fitzgerald and the University of Pennsylvania. Now I want to compare Hunter Biden and Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn's plea deal gets revoked. Emmett Sullivan goes crazy, appoints a judge who comes in with a 30-page blistering report accusing Barr's Department of Justice of being corrupt. Hunter Biden gets the sweetest of sweetheart deals ever, Mollie Hemingway, ever. Do you think the judge in that case is going to probe deeply?
I don't think so at this point, although I think they thought when that sweetheart deal was agreed to that they could push it out as, you saw some of the early talking points. Oh, see, this shows that nobody's above the law and that the Department of Justice is fair. They're going after Hunter Biden. Unfortunately for them, the entire country reacted with, are you kidding me? They knew that other people, like even yesterday there was this indictment of someone for a FARA violation, a failure to register as a foreign agent. And everyone's thinking like, wait a minute, how did Hunter Biden get away with no FARA violations when that's something that you can level at the drop of a hat? They tried to pretend like this was a really good enforcement of the rule of law. Nobody believed it because of just what an amazing sweetheart deal it was. They know people with gun violations that get up to 10 years in prison. And Hunter Biden got a plea with nothing. So
a deferred prosecution agreement. And I know people who have gone to jail for federal income tax evasion, gone to jail for a long time, for a lot less money, and they did not let their statutes run. Joe Biden's son got off with 2 federal income tax evasions with nothing, 2 with misdemeanors, and a gun violation. This is the Democrats, mind you, a gun violation that has landed thousands of people in jail. I haven't even seen one story on how many people are in jail for a similar lying on an application to get a gun.
But I saw that the Department of Justice was thinking about delaying a finalization of this deal out of, that there might be some concern that it needs to be reviewed or something like that. Their effort to make it seem legitimate wasn't working, and so they might have to review it in some way. There's so many swirling issues. Whether just even like, to me, finding the cocaine in the White House and who knows that belongs to. But a lot of people just sort of reasonably say, like, this reminds us of how weird this deal was for Hunter, which involves drugs and guns and taxes. And we have an unresolved issue at the house where he apparently is living. This is a PR disaster for Biden and the Justice Department.
And the double standard, Mollie, on everything. There is a double standard that is like the Titanic going down on every single story. And I think the reason that Vivek Ramaswamy has done so well is he speaks bluntly about many of those issues about which there's a double standard, especially where wokeism rules. Last minute to you, Mollie.
Well, that's why he seems to be of interest to people. And I also was disappointed Chris Christie yesterday, who would be a natural fit for talking about this major Republican concern about 2 standards of justice. He's out there praising Christopher Wray, using some of these talking points about Donald Trump being a Russian asset. It just doesn't seem like he's actually trying to win the Republican nomination when he's talking that way. But anyone who wants to win the nomination needs to understand 2 standards of justice is probably the main unifying issue for the Republican Party.
That's it. It's the 2 standards is not acceptable because it's going to screw us eventually. Mollie Hemingway, MZ Hemingway on Twitter. By us, I mean every American.